So welcome to our class on working skillfully with unskillful thoughts. I'm glad to see this is a topic of interest to quite a few people. The teachers were just talking about how it's of interest to us also, and that it continues to be a teaching that is very meaningful. So it's delightful to see so many of you. I was looking at the list of people registered, and we have people from, I think, 9 different countries and at least a half a dozen US states. Don't know how many of you all are here from those places yet, but it's great that there's interest from all over the world, so we can consider ourselves to be quite a diverse and widespread community studying this sutta today. Kirsten and Marjolein are going to say something in just a moment. I'm Kim Allen. I think many of you know me from some of the Sati Center classes, but if not, I've been around this community for a while and delight in teaching the suttas. And I'm very delighted to be here with my 2 good friends today. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think, for us to explore this together and bring a variety of perspectives. And in addition, each of you is bringing a perspective to this topic. So just by way of getting us a little more connected, I wonder if anybody would like to write in the chat. You can write where you're from, so we have a sense of that, or a little bit about how you feel now, or some interest that you have in this course today. It would be really nice to hear from just a few of you. I think the chat should be enabled. Is it enabled? Yeah, there we go. All right, Bill is in Dallas. Santa Monica, very nice. New York. Yeah. Thankful, there we go. We have an emotion expressed. Very nice to see you. All right, well, as you're continuing, I think I'll turn it over to Kirsten to say what she would like to say by way of introduction.
Well, just to echo the welcome to everyone, it's really lovely to see all of the different places that you're all coming from. And name again is Kirsten, and I live up in White Salmon, Washington, which is a home of many, many tribal peoples, the Yakama and the Wasco and the Wishram and the Warm Springs Federation and many other beings, black bears and cougars and many salmon. So it's really wonderful to notice that there's some of you all representing the Northwest up here with me. And like Kim, just so delighted to be sharing on a topic that is endlessly fascinating and also with dear, dear Dharma friends. So I'm really looking forward to our time together. And I'll just pass it on to Marjolein.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Marjolein, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you and exploring this very rich sutta together. Suttas are such an inspiration for me, and this one in particular is also so interesting and so practical that I'm happy that we are getting a chance to share this with you. I live in Richmond, Virginia, where I am now, the Powhatan Lands. And yeah, I'm just happy to be here with my Dharma friends, Kim and Kirsten, and with all of you, beautiful Dharma beings. And so I want to offer a few introductory words about what we're going to do today. As I see, there's still some chats coming in. It's so nice to see the beautiful words and where you're all from, the diversity of where everyone is. And so, like I alluded to, we're going to talk about a specific sutta today. This is the Majjhima Nikaya 20. And you, in the email, you got the link, I think, to this sutta. So you might have seen it already. You might have had a chance to look at it. And there's no need for knowing the sutta before this class. But maybe good to know there are various translations of this sutta title. And I'm just gonna name a few so that you might be able to get a flavor of what the sutta is about. And so one translation is the stabilization of thought, or the discourse on the forms of thought, or the removal of distracting thoughts. And one translation is how to stop thinking. So yeah, this sutta is just very practical. And it's really about how to work with unskillful thoughts and mind states. And we probably all are very familiar with unskillful thoughts and mind states. We experience those in our day-to-day life, probably multiple times a day, and in our meditation as well. And most of those thoughts are then based in greed, aversion, or delusion, the three unwholesome roots of our existence. For example, we might get angry easily, or anxious, or sad, or clingy, attached, wanting things. And what we often learn in meditation is to kind of just be with those kind of mind states that are unskillful, and the unaccompanying thoughts that go along with the angriness or the sadness. And that's actually really good advice, since that helps us to be resilient in the face of any difficulty that might arise. And helps us also to start to learn from the difficulties that we are experiencing. If we can just be with whatever arises, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, whether it's wholesome or unwholesome, then we're building this resiliency, building our capacity to be with whatever arises. But what is often less known is that the Buddha has also offered ways that we can be a little bit more active, some other approaches. And this can be a refreshing perspective, can be a great tool in our meditation toolbox to have some other approaches than just being with. And so this sutta, this Majjhima Nikaya 20, goes over these different methods, 5 different methods or ways to deal with unskillful thoughts and mind states. And I'll just name them for now, and then we'll take a closer look at each of those 5 methods or ways that we can work with unskillful thoughts. And so the first one is to replace unwholesome thoughts with wholesome ones. Then the second method is to examine the danger in unwholesome thoughts. The third method is to forget or to not pay attention to unwholesome thoughts. And the fourth method is to understand the conditions behind the recurring pattern. And then the fifth method is to stop the thought. And each of these methods also comes with an evocative simile. We will also share the similes with you, since they can be very powerful and very interesting to work with as well. And then for some of them, we'll also offer a guided meditation, so that you can also get a sense of how to work with them. And then over the course of this morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are, we'll also have a couple of breaks, so you can, or we call them breaks / walking periods, where you can go to the bathroom and get your tea and things like that, so that you know those come as well at some point at intervals. And then yeah, I want to hand it over to Kirsten.
Okay, thanks for that introduction to our morning, afternoon, evening together. And we thought we would begin with a short meditation practice where we're not necessarily working explicitly with one of these methods, but we're getting acquainted with thought and with the thinking process. And just to acknowledge that, thoughts come in so many different forms and shapes and sizes. Some people think in images, in sound, um, in in words, so it's very expansive, this kind of realm of the thinking process that we're working with today. And so this morning, to have an opportunity to just sit and explore this dimension of our experience together. So I'll be leading us in a short guided practice of 15 minutes. And we'll begin with, probably if this is something that is already your primary practice, to have an anchor of some kind of the body or the breath. And then we'll expand that our attention to include more aspects of our experience, including the thinking process, including thoughts. And as perhaps some of you have heard a number of times, teachers will say, the mind thinks that the way that the eyes see and the mouth salivates, it's a natural process of our experience. And one important thing that we're cultivating when we practice is to not get lost in the content of the thoughts, but to notice that the process itself is happening. So with that preamble, invite you to find a posture that is supportive for your practice. A posture that helps you to be both alert and relaxed. And perhaps closing the eyes. And really allowing yourself to feel the connection of the earth supporting you. Inviting and allowing the body to relax, and to really be received by the earth. You might notice some areas of habitual tension in the body and inviting those to soften. The areas behind the eyes, the jaw, traveling through the diaphragm and the belly, the pelvis, all the way through the legs, the thighs, the ankles, the toes. Letting the breath find its own natural rhythm. And resting your attention on the breath. You might notice it at the nostrils most prominently, or the abdomen, or just the whole body itself, sitting and breathing. resting here. Taking your time, just gradually allowing awareness to open to sensation. Not necessarily looking for sensation, but if they arise, just being aware of them with the same relaxed attitude that we bring to the breath. Pulsing, vibrating, tingling. Any sensations in the body. Pressure, heat or coolness. Gradually again expanding the field of your attention or awareness to notice sound. The sound of my voice, the sounds in the space that you're occupying, just allowing those to be known, coming and going. And now including the thought process itself as part of this meditation field. And it can be easy to realize you've been thinking without noticing. And when we realize it, here we are in the present moment, sitting here, breathing. We also might notice that at times we might notice a thought. Or we might notice ourselves thinking. We might name that with a label, simply knowing the process of thinking is happening. No need to get lost in the content of a thought or figuring the thought out. Often if we notice that thinking is happening, the thought just dissolves on its own. You might notice different themes of thought or repetitive patterns, planning or remembering, fantasizing, worrying. Sometimes it's helpful to apply a label to the different theme. Just soft, gentle, planning, worrying. And just naming it thinking is fine too. Just not spending any extra energy to find the right word. Engaging a relaxed curiosity. Thoughts coming and going. Just as sensation, sound, and breath are also coming and going in the field of our attention. And we'll spend the last few minutes of this practice period together in silence until the sound of the bell. method of working with distracting thoughts. And to also say, what is a distracting thought? I mean, the mind thinks, right? We've made that clear. The mind thinks thoughts, and the thinking process is very useful. We couldn't survive without it. But what we're referring to here are the thoughts that take us into a level of distraction where we're not able to concentrate the mind on a given object or even be present for what's happening right now. And the Thai forest master Ajahn Buddhadasa was asked what he thought of the modern world, and he said, lost in thought, lost in thought. And when we're lost in thought, we're very much oftentimes, creating these very elaborate stories of self that remove us from the direct experience of being here. And that those of you who might have been practicing for a long time can also recognize the benefits of the concentrated mind and the insight that and the freedom that can be born of a mind that is free of distraction. So this first method is replacing unwholesome thoughts with wholesome thoughts. And Marjolein's going to speak a bit about what wholesome and unwholesome might refer to, but for now, just kind of suspend that question or hold that question. And maybe I'll just say, enough to say that that those unwholesome thoughts could be those that actually generate the defilements in the mind and heart, and also, again, distract us from being fully present to what's happening now and to the nature of our experience. So the Buddha said in this sutta that when a bhikkhu is giving attention to some sign, and owing to that sign, there arise in them evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion, then they should give attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome. So again, if there's something that the mind is resting upon or thinking through that that generates these thoughts that are connected with desire, with aversion, with delusion, then what might be a suitable replacement? And so the text of the sutta that we're teaching from uses this simile of a coarse peg and a fine peg. So the idea is that if there's a carpenter, and I'll actually read it first. So just as a skilled carpenter or his apprentice might knock out, remove, and extract a coarse peg by means of a fine one, so too, when a bhikkhu gives attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome, their mind becomes steady internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated. So the idea here is that the small peg is a thought that we're using to replace this unwholesome thought, but it's so small that it's not going to get stuck in the mind. So we're replacing it, but we're not replacing it with another thing that we're going to perseverate around or be distracted by, but it's something just to dislodge the unwholesome thought process or content of that thought. And one way that we can really think about this method is how the mind develops such deep habits of thought. So, I'm guessing that many of you have heard, when the mind, whatever the mind frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of the mind, these words of the Buddha. And so what is it to really first be able to see the ways in which the mind has its habit patterns that are not always wholesome, and then use this technique of changing those out, finding some other thing to replace this unwholesome pattern. May it be the pattern of judging or comparing or self-doubt or ruminating, any of these, that each one of us has our own pattern that the mind really seems to enjoy chewing upon. And so one really nice way of working with this is actually, if we know that their mind tends to judge others, for example, then having some sort of practice in our toolkit, a substitute in our toolkit, maybe an antidote to that judging mind, is generating thoughts of loving kindness, or finding one thing that we really find valuable or useful or lovely about the person or the being that we might be apt to judge. So one way also of being able to discern, is this a wholesome thought? Is this an unwholesome thought? Is checking into the sensations of the body. Is the body getting tense? Is there a contraction? And oftentimes that is an indication that there is some thought pattern, there's some aspect of the thinking that is creating a sense of contraction or restriction. And that's a really lovely way of being able to come back to the present moment, maybe use a substitute of a thought, but also one way to think about this sutta is that even the simple act of coming back to, if we're using an anchor, for example, like the breath, that is substituting a small peg for that large peg. The breath itself is, we're redirecting, and we're using a thought to do that. So one of the ways that this sutta is also so valuable, or this first method is so valuable, is that it's both helping us cultivate new habits of mind, but it's also helping us to really see the agency that we have to recognize thoughts as wholesome and unwholesome, and to redirect the attention. And that level of empowerment can be so helpful in our practice. It brings us faith, and it brings us motivation and encouragement that that's actually possible. That we're not driven by the kind of crazy machinations of this mind that we get to see when we're practicing. I mean, it's a wild experience in there oftentimes. So to give some examples of ways that we might use this method of substituting. So I already mentioned, if there's aversive thoughts, if there's a judging or a criticizing, then we might consider ourselves, if it's self-judgment, we might consider positive qualities that we really admire of ourselves. If it's others, we might do that for others. If there's a boredom can be a common theme, that we might reflect on our intention for practicing. Why are we practicing? And that can generate that sense of motivation. If there are doubting thoughts, we might replace those with reflections on our own capacity, or reflections on the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the Triple Jewel. If there's a lot of wanting mind, we might reflect on the impermanence of things. Really seeing that when we want that piece of cake, we can also remember what it's like to just have finished it. It comes and goes so quickly. And what's left after it's gone? Maybe just a full belly. But to recognize the impermanence of things can help to replace or soften the wanting mind, the wanting thought. I have just an example of using this method in my own life. I remember many years ago, a friend asking me, what are the first thoughts that come through your mind when you wake up in the morning? So I started to notice the first thoughts that would come through the mind in the morning were 9 times out of 10 planning anxious thoughts. You know, what do I need to do? What comes next? Will I have enough time for this? Definitely brings and brought a sensation of constriction and contraction into the body, a good sign that these are not wholesome thoughts. And I started to use this method of replacing those thoughts. When I woke up in the morning, I would automatically direct the mind to a gratitude practice. And what am I grateful for? And that was just so such a beautiful redirect that years later, the mind has now developed a new habit. When I wake up, the mind goes immediately to gratitude, So again, this capacity that we have to retrain the mind, it's a gift and it's powerful, and it is so important in our practice and in recognizing the capacity for ourselves in this practice. So another thing I'll just say about this method is that you do not need to apply this method to every single thought. You know, the usefulness of this is when we're seeing these habitual habits of the mind that are recurring again and again. And then we can, generate this list of alternatives. What are we going to supplant this unwholesome thought with that will create this new patterning in our mind and heart so that we're not continuing to feed greed, hatred, and delusion through these habitual thought patterns. And like I said, one way that I like to approach this method is that we can think about it in terms of practicing with an anchor, that we are replacing the wandering mind with the anchor, whether that's breath, whether that's body, whether that's more open awareness, that we're coming back to something, and that redirecting is a skillful use of this method. So just to summarize, that this first method, this simile of the peg, of replacing this coarse peg with a smaller peg that does not get stuck, it can help us retrain the unskillful habitual tendencies of the mind and strengthen our capacity to choose, which fundamentally, really loosens our identification with thoughts, which are so tricky. I mean, this is where we get caught in creating these very elaborate senses of self. So another reason that this sutta in general is just so rich and exciting to work with. So with that, I will pass it on to Kim. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten, for that beautiful exposition of the first method. Such a useful one. We're dwelling on it because it's so important and also so readily available, usually. So the next thing we'll do is we'll try it out. We're going to do another meditation. I would like to invite, since we've been sitting for a little while, if you want to just like stretch your arms out, or even like stand up in place just briefly, just to get the body a little bit of motion. Marjolein mentioned that we're going to have breaks, and we will, but our plan was to do this next meditation at this point. So when you're ready, settling back into a posture that will be supportive for a sit. We'll sit for about 25 minutes or so. Just bringing yourself back into stillness. And if it's comfortable for you, I invite closing the eyes so that you can bring the attention inward. If you're not going to have your eyes closed, it's very helpful to keep them downcast and not focused on anything in particular. What we want is an undistracted set of inputs so that we can see the mind, the thinking. So settling in, perhaps sensing the body in the whatever posture you're in, perhaps sitting, perhaps lying down. Standing would be okay too. Just sensing the body as it is. And let's invite some ease into the body. So softening the muscles of the face, around the eyes, the jaw, softening the eyes and the eye sockets. Perhaps feeling yourself settling back a little bit. Sometimes we lean forward toward a screen. So letting yourself feel very balanced, upright in the posture. Letting the shoulders soften or release in case there's any tension. I sometimes imagine the shoulder blades sliding down the back. Letting the belly be soft. Maybe letting it kind of round out. We need to hold the belly in. And releasing any bracing in the arms or the legs. Letting the limbs rest naturally. We can't necessarily make the body feel easeful and certainly can't eliminate all the aches and pains, but just inviting a sense of ease in the body and with the body, how it is now. Letting the mind be at ease with the body. And inviting now a connection with our intention. And in this case, for practicing this method, we can just bring to mind simply that we know the value of a wholesome mind. We know the value of a mind that's not caught up or perpetuating various kinds of desire or aversion or delusion. It's good in the present moment, and it's good for the future effects that it brings. So we're intending to nurture wholesomeness in some way through our practice. And with that, we invite a mindfulness to come in more fully. Suttas say we bring mindfulness to the fore. So putting in the foreground of the mind the sense of being aware in the present moment in a simple, direct, easeful way. We've been pointing to the empowerment that we have in directing our attention. We don't have 100% power there, but we we have some, like having an oar when going down a river. So directing the attention to the sensations of breathing. The invitation is to use the breath as our anchor during this sit, place that we return, a home where we rest. If for some reason the breath is not comfortable for you or it's very unfamiliar, if you've never done breath meditation, you can use something else, the body, or a more open awareness if you're well practiced in a practice like that. But otherwise, just use the breath as a simple resting place. As we sit, we may notice thinking activity, as Kirsten pointed to previously. It's a normal function of the mind. We don't need to pounce on every thought as a mistake. If it's simple, we can simply redirect to the breath or our anchor, replacing the energy of distraction or wandering with the simple movement of being in the present. As we continue to sit, it's normal that we'll notice times when the mind has picked up some sign, some prompt has come in through a sound or a thought or a body sensation, and the mind has chosen to pick that up and begin to think. And if it seems to be one of these patterns that Kirsten named, worrying or planning, ruminating, can notice that, perhaps feel that there's maybe some tension associated with being lost. I find when the mind has been thinking for a while, tension has crept in around my eyes, or sometimes in my neck or shoulders. It's good to notice that. And then we could choose a replacement that somehow counters this unwholesome tendency. Perhaps a positive quality of a person. Or our intention. We're noticing that something that we want probably won't bring us ultimate happiness, and that it changes. there's an art to choosing a simple replacement that brings ease and rebalances the mind. A finer peg than the coarse one we had been stuck on. We feel the ease of that replacement thought. And then we can return perhaps to the breath or our anchor and continue on. So trying this out for yourself for a bit. This first method, like all of the methods we'll teach today, is an art form. It's like learning to do pottery or a physical skill. When we first start out, it might be a little clumsy or formulaic, but you may start to see ways in which it can begin to feel more natural in your mind as you get the hang of it. Sensing, is this a thought that needs replacement? If so, with what? And this image of the coarse peg and the fine peg, another dimension is that the fine peg is more refined than the coarse blunt one. So a blunt thought of judgment, you can feel the heavy-handedness of that. Redirect the mind toward a more subtle appreciation of a person's character, for example, and feel the refinement of that. Finer peg is not only smaller, but gentler, smoother. Soften into the ease of that. Playing a bit with this art form. Just a couple of minutes of this sitting, inviting a return to the body. Are you still connected to the breath, to the sitting posture? Sensing again and inviting ease throughout the head area, the shoulders, belly. And considering, how was that method for you? What kinds of thoughts did you notice? How did it feel to replace them? And how did you relate to the method? Did you take it on as a project, increasing tension through it? So this is another dimension of practice. Providing some appreciation for the possibility of redirecting the mind.
Thank you, Kim, for this beautiful meditation. We have a few minutes now for questions or sharing. If there's anything that came up for you that you have a question about or you'd like to share. Perhaps you can use the Zoom hand under the reactions button at the bottom, and we might, depending on how many people raise their hand, we might not get to all of them, but there will be other Q&A or sharing opportunities later during this session. So yeah, feel welcome to raise your hand. Yeah, Bill. Are you able to unmute yourself, Bill?
Yes, I am. Sorry. Let's try that again. I was just going to say that with regard to replacing thoughts like that, I've had somewhat with Ton Glenn, if I'm pronouncing that right. I don't do it a lot, but I have been able to do some of it and turn thoughts around. You know, to where it's more where the self-pity and the fear go away. And I just wanted to make that comment, and you may comment on it or not. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Bill. Yeah, Tom Len is a beautiful practice that is, yeah, basically this method. So if anyone's not familiar with it, there's probably a lot of information online if you're interested in it. It's about breathing in the suffering or the difficulty, breathing out love. I believe I haven't actually practiced much with it, but I think that's kind of the practice. Yeah. I did see, am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, Aditi. Yeah, thanks, Kim, for that meditation. Like I noticed thinking, and I noticed like the content was like in some form like Dhamma, like planning, okay, I'm going to go for this day long, whatever. And I noticed that the invitation was to come back to the breath, but then like somehow it was still juicier to think that thought. And I kind of gave myself permission. Oh, that's a Dhamma talk, like, Dhamma thought, so go ahead, like, don't worry, enjoy your thinking. And so I just noticed that.
You want to take this, Kim?
could begin, and I'll invite either of the other teachers to add. Yeah, you bring up something really important, Aditi, is that there are actually different levels of thought, if you will, and they're ones that are obviously unwholesome and obviously painful and difficult with. And then there are some thoughts that are kind of enjoyable, and there are ones that seem quite wholesome, right? Thinking about the Dharma is what you suggested. I can tell you that teachers think about what they're going to say in their Dharma talks during sitting. So, and that all feels like, oh yeah, I should follow that. I mean, here I am quiet, these creative ideas are coming, or these good plans for the future. And, in a sense, it's less unwholesome, let's say, than ones that are obviously coming from greed, hatred, and delusion. But even these kinds of Dharma thoughts are not connected to the present moment. So they're about the future. They often have a sense of self subtly in them, even if they're not about bolstering me as something great or something like that. There's still a sense of, I'm going to go do this, or I'm going to give this Dharma talk and I need to have a frame in my mind about it. So you can look for the more subtle ways that there are still entanglement in something that's not present. So there's a slight amount of maybe delusion under a thought like that. Yeah. And so it's not, horribly unwholesome, but it's also not so onward leading to go on with a thought like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense, but I'm wondering, like, will there be a natural tendency one day, like, to not think these, or one has to exert more effort?
Well, I think it's both. There are thoughts that just generally go away with more practice, but often we need practice. But remember that the root of restlessness, the tendency to leave the present moment, does not go until arahantship. So we're going to have little distractions all the way along the path. So yeah, this first method is the lightest one, the easiest one to kind of just flip to something else. Maybe you'll see something useful in some of the other methods we talk about also in investigating some of these tendencies. So that's a lot. I'll see if Marjolein and Kirsten want to add anything.
Judy, you want to ask your question or share?
Can you hear me? So I wanted to ask if this was what I'm going to describe, if it was utilizing the method that you described. So when we started doing when I started doing Kim's meditation, I noticed that the thoughts were, negative about myself. Like I didn't set up my camera right. I don't have the right glasses. I have to lay down. I have to walk, whatever. So I substituted the thoughts of may you be at ease to myself. So I was saying, may you be at ease. And then I just was doing the walking meditation. Is that substituting a thought, or is that still about self? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Judy. Kirsten, would you like to comment on this?
I would actually say that that's a beautiful a beautiful way to implement this method. We're talking about, the more subtle versus the more coarse pegs, and that's very much a more subtle peg, just that simple dropping of a phrase of, may I be at ease. The metta phrases and the Brahma Vihara phrases in general can be really useful alternates to coarser thought, a more unwholesome thought pattern. So I think that's beautiful. And then if you notice that subtler thought starts to perpetuate more selfing, then you could potentially find a more subtle peg to, push that one out. But I think that's a very skillful approach to the method. Yeah, it's a beautiful example.
Yeah, really great. Thank you, Judy. And this might be a good time to move on to the next thing. Kirsten, would you want to offer your reflection?
Yeah. Maybe I will just say one more thing about Aditi's comment. I wasn't sure if we would have time, so I held back, but since we have a minute planned, just to I think it's such a great it's such a great question. And sometimes with those sort of how wholesome is this and how useful is this, something that can be really beautiful to reflect upon is our intention for practice. And Kim asked us to sort of seed the beginning of our meditation with an intention, and that intention was to practice this method. But you can also think about, what's the intention for practice in general? And, and then you can evaluate, is planning your next Dharma training supporting that intention. So that's another way to approach that question. Such a good one. Okay, so we're going to transition into a period of a break period. And so you might choose to do some walking, you might choose to lie down or get a little tea, go to the bathroom, but regardless, we'd like to include this break as a practice period. And the invitation is really just to bring this curiosity to the thinking process. And it can be really interesting, to see as we're in a familiar place that might be our home, or maybe we're in an unfamiliar place, what are those tendencies of the mind that get picked up when we encounter different signs? When we potentially walk by a bookshelf or close the computer or whatever it is, what gets generated, and to just bring that level of curiosity to the thinking process. And you might choose to play with this first method if it's you're noticing that the mind starts to engage with unwholesome thoughts. Maybe experiment with planting something in. Judy shared a beautiful phrase. Maybe there's a meta phrase that pops in as an alternate. But really to just be playful and easy and relaxed around this, because the last thing that we're wanting to do is get kind of hardened and gripped around the thinking process and trying to catch every single thought and evaluate each thought for wholesome or unwholesomeness, and that just creates a sense of stress and contraction. But instead, how can we engage with this and these practices in ways that bring a sense of aliveness and curiosity and real onward leadingness. So that's the invitation. And we will be coming back at 40 after the hour. So whatever hour you're at, it will be 40 after the hour. And because I did go through that prompt fairly quickly, is there any questions? Does that feel clear, what we're inviting for this period? Yeah, okay. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here and practicing together. What a joy. And see you back in a little over 15 minutes.
Yeah, so let's get back together. And again, invitation, if you feel comfortable and it works for you, to turn on your camera so we can see each other. And of course, if it doesn't work for you for some reason, don't worry about it. It's also okay to have it off. And so I want to offer a few reflections on the second method and the third method. Second method about examining danger, and the third method about withdrawing attention. And let's start with the second method. The Buddha, he mentions in the sutta, I'll just read it. While one is giving attention to some other sign, and this word sign is sometimes also translated as subject, so something, some subject. If one is giving attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome, there still arises in one evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion, then one should examine the danger in those thoughts thus. These thoughts are unwholesome, they are reprehensible, they result in suffering. And when one examines the danger in those thoughts, then any evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion are abandoned in them and subside. And the mind becomes steady, internally quiet, and brought to signlessness and concentrated. And so the Buddha basically points here to that, like if this first method that we pay attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome, if that doesn't work, there's still unwholesomeness arising, then we can start to examine the danger in the thoughts. And so I see this basically as a wise reflection. We can reflect on these unwholesome thoughts. And these are thoughts based in the 3 unwholesome roots. Kirsten already said I would say a little bit more about unwholesomeness, what that means. And so thoughts based in these 3 unwholesome roots that the Buddha mentions in this particular part of the sutta. Greed or desire is the first one. Aversion or hate, the second one. And then delusion is the third unwholesome root. And the Pali words for these 3 roots, lobha, dosa, and moha, actually mean a lot more than the translations in English. Like lobha means anything from the mildest little wanting that we might have to the deepest attachment or clinging that might arise. And dosa means anything from the mildest kind of irritation to intense hate that we can experience, and anything in between. Moha means delusion or ignorance, and this is about a not knowing and not clear seeing of how things really are. And so it's a very broad spectrum of thoughts and mind states that fall under these 3 unwholesome roots. And so the English words are not capturing everything. And so the Buddha advises us to reflect that these thoughts are unwholesome, they are reprehensible, and they result in suffering. And we can look at the first word, unwholesome, in this reflection. And the word, actually the Pali word is akusala, and it's sometimes also translated as unskillful. And so we can reflect on these 3 roots of this unskillfulness, this unwholesomeness. And these are mental states basically that lead to harmful consequences for oneself, for others, or both self and others. Unwholesome mental states are basically leading us away from happiness and leading us towards more suffering or difficulty. They are leading to, they can lead to harmful consequences for others or ourselves or both self and others. And so when we reflect in this way, then we can see that these thoughts are maybe not so helpful, that they are actually not onward leading, that they are causing us suffering or dukkha or dissatisfaction in this very moment. And in this very moment we can see that these kind of thoughts, like let's say it's an angry thought, or a sad thought, we can see the unsatisfactoriness there, the unpleasantness of it. And sometimes just seeing that, reflecting on this unpleasantness, this unsatisfactoriness, this dukkha nature of this thought can be enough for the thought to subside, or even that the mental state that goes with the thought it might subside or at least diminish a little bit, or there might be a little bit of a space between us observing the thought and the thought itself. And maybe to make it a little bit more concrete, a little example, like let's say we just spilled coffee all over our new rug, and there might be like this thought arising, like, oh, I'm so clumsy, or what a mess, now my rug is ruined, or maybe you're blaming the cup is so unstable, or whatever it is, so there's these thoughts arising, this whole cluster of thoughts around this spilling of the coffee on our new rug. And when we then use this reflection, we can notice, oh, these thoughts might not be onward leading, or might be even judging ourselves. And they also don't really fix the situation. It's not really helping us in this situation. And they're actually contributing to dissatisfaction in this moment. And just to compare this with, or to look at, like, what would it be like if you would be thinking thoughts like, oh, it's okay, honey. If you say that to yourself, it's okay, honey. Everyone sometimes spills something. Or it's okay, I'm sure I can clean this up and the rug will be as new. Or something kind like that to yourself. And that feels quite different, doesn't it? And so this is just to show that the first types of thoughts, like, oh, I'm so clumsy, and what a mess, and I'm doing everything wrong, or whatever it is, they have this unpleasant, unwholesome vibe to them. They're not onward leading. While the thoughts of, like, oh, it's okay, honey, and I'm sure I'll be able to fix this or clean this, they have a pleasant, wholesome vibe to them. And so the invitation for this method is to reflect on these types of thoughts, and to recognize the unpleasantness, the unwholesomeness in it, the unskillful vibe. And then the Buddha basically says, maybe they diminish when we do that, maybe they subside. The Buddha says to examine the danger, right? It's the danger in it. And so another way I use this is that I reflect on that these unwholesome thoughts might lead to unwholesome results, unwholesome consequences. Like when I notice that anger is starting to arise because my partner is doing something that I don't like. And then sometimes I catch myself that this anger is arising. And if I then catch myself, I can reflect on it. Like, if I let this anger do its thing, then I will most likely act on this anger. And I will have an angry reaction to my partner, which might spiral actually into more unwholesomeness from both sides. She might be also responding with anger onto my anger. So it's going to be this whole spiral. And when I catch myself with the anger arising, it doesn't have to spiral out of control, because I can see the unwholesomeness. I can see the danger, so to speak, in this anger arising, these angry thoughts. And so the Buddha had these three words, these three phrases. The first was the unwholesomeness, to reflect on the unwholesomeness. The second one is to look at the reprehensibility, that's reprehensible. The Pali word savajja means objectionable, blameworthy, wrong, or at fault. And it might be easy to interpret this as, okay, we are at fault, we're personally at fault, we are to be blamed. But I think that's not such a helpful perspective. That's basically putting on more unwholesomeness. So it might be more helpful to see this, that we all have this tendency of mind to think unwholesome thoughts, to have these unwholesome mind states. That's the nature of the unawakened mind, basically. It's based on previous causes and conditions that these unwholesome thoughts arise. So it's not our personal fault. It's just unwholesome visitors of the mind based on previous causes and conditions. Maybe we can even see them as aspects of the mind that are trying to do their best to help us in ways that might not be super helpful. In that way, these visitors of the mind, we could say, are quote unquote blameworthy or quote unquote at fault. And so I think we can reflect on them as visitors of the mind that are misguided, trying to help us, but they're not so helpful. And then the third aspect that the Buddha mentions to reflect on is that these thoughts and mind states result in suffering, or dukkha in Pali. Another translation of dukkha is unsatisfactoriness. And so I think this, I already touched on this with the other two as well. We can probably all clearly see the unsatisfactoriness of these thoughts and how they lead to more unsatisfactoriness. Then I want to look at the simile for this method. And the simile, I also read the simile. I think it's quite a provocative simile. And so if you haven't read it yet in the sutta yourself, it's a little graphic. So it says, just as a man or woman, young, youthful, and fond of ornaments, would be horrified, humiliated, and disgusted if the carcass of a snake or a dog or a human being were hung around his or her neck, so too one should examine the danger in those thoughts thus. These thoughts are unwholesome, they're reprehensible, they result in suffering. And I think maybe the Buddha chose such a horrifying image to show that there is danger in these thoughts. They are not as innocent as they seem. And one of my teachers, Sayadaw U Tejaniya, he has this book with the title, Don't Look Down on the Defilements, which are the 3 unwholesome roots. Don't look down on the defilements, they will laugh at you. So this really shows us that it's not to be looked down upon. It is really to be taken as a warning sign that we're going in an unwholesome direction, and that just like we don't want a carcass around our neck, we also don't want these thoughts in our minds. And so it can be for some a useful analogy to dispel the thought. But for others it might be a bit too strong, maybe even unhelpful to think of it like this. And so I'm just offering this for those for whom it might be helpful to think of these thoughts like carcasses. And so you can also let it go if it feels not so helpful and a bit too much, a bit too graphic. Don't worry about that. And so the third method, I'll also touch on that one. I'll read this one as well. So if while one is examining the danger in those thoughts, there still arises in them evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion, then one should try to forget those thoughts and should not give attention to them. The word here for forgetting the thoughts is actually asati. So the opposite of sati, which is mindfulness. The opposite of mindfulness. And so when we examine the danger in the thoughts and it doesn't help, then the Buddha suggests we can try to forget these thoughts. And I think the forgetting also ties into the not giving attention to thoughts. Like we're not going to engage the thoughts, Either we're trying to forget them or we're trying to not give attention to them. And you might recognize that sometimes we have this choice to no longer engage in certain thoughts. We can basically say sometimes to a thought or thought stream or mind states, not now, or stop. And this sometimes this very simple, this not now, can be very effective. And sometimes we might need a bit of a friendly tone towards the thoughts. Like, I know you're trying to help me and you have some good points, but I choose to pay attention to something else now. Choose not to pay attention to you. And so we're actively withdrawing our attention from the unwholesome mind states. And the simile for this one is, it goes like this. Just as a person with good eyes who did not want to see forms that had come within range of sight would either shut their eyes or look away, so too one should try to forget those thoughts and should not give attention to them. And so I think this is interesting because so often the instruction is to stay with our difficult experiences and to actually not look away, to face them. But there are times that it might be skillful to turn away from difficulty, to ignore it, to look away, to forget. And so I think we can add this to our toolbox of skillful means or skillful tools. At times, this can be helpful to use this. Particularly perhaps when something very emotional is happening, intense thought trains or very emotionally loaded thought trains that can be very overwhelming, then it can be really helpful to look away, to not pay attention. And sometimes it can be something more neutral, like we did with the first method, looking at the breath or our anchor or feeling our feet on the ground, that kind of thing. And you might have your own methods to work with these very overwhelming kind of mind states or thought trains. And so I want to now invite you to practice with these two methods. So I'll offer a bit of a guided meditation. And normally the Buddha advises us to do these methods in order. So start with the first method and the second and the third, etc. But we'll skip the first method for now so that we can practice with these two methods. But just so you know, or if you want to do this in the future. And so let's settle back into our meditation posture, as far as you haven't already. Perhaps you'd like to breathe in and out a little deeper, and releasing any tension or stress on the out breath. Being in touch with the body as it is sitting here or laying down or standing. And perhaps you can look at the body to see if there's any tension you'd like to release. Perhaps an area in the body where there is a usual buildup of tension. Just a simple invitation. May this area relax. May there be some softness. I want to invite you to just notice the breath again, if that's your anchor, or a different anchor if you're used to a different anchor. And then from this place of anchoring ourselves to the breath or our chosen anchor, you can notice if there's any thoughts arising or mental states, especially if there are any thoughts or mental states that are rooted in one of those three unwholesome roots of greed, aversion, and delusion. And you don't have to go look for those thoughts in the sense of if they're not there, they're not there. But if they are there, perhaps you can use this reflection, this wise reflection that the Buddha offered us, looking at the unwholesomeness, the danger of the unwholesomeness in these thoughts. And perhaps there's a thought like, oh, am I doing this right? Maybe I'm not doing this right. I'm not good at this. And we can reflect, maybe this thought is not so onward leading. Maybe this thought is not so wholesome. Perhaps we can tune into the unpleasantness of the thought. Perhaps we can also reflect on the misguidedness of this visitor, the thoughts, these mind states, are visitors of the mind, misguided, thinking they're helping us, while in reality they're leading to more and more dukkha. And also notice that if you reflect on these thoughts in this way, noticing the unwholesomeness, noticing the misguidedness of them, noticing they result in suffering and dukkha. Like, how does that help in letting them go? Does it help? Or perhaps at least it will give us some insight into the thought, into the not so helpful nature of this thought. Just knowing that can be very helpful in itself. Perhaps you're noticing that sometimes this reflection, this wise reflection, is not helping. It's not helping these thoughts to to dissipate in some way. And then you're also welcome to use the second or the third method, rather, to forget or to not give attention. And perhaps you can use this little, just this little phrase of "not now," or just stop. And then see where the attention goes. Attention goes somewhere after we've offered this "not now" or "stop" phrase. And perhaps it goes back to the breath or the anchor. It can be very useful to go back there. Perhaps there's more of an open awareness if you're used to that practice. And you're also welcome to use the more friendly way of approaching the unwholesome thoughts. For example, I know you're doing your best to help me, but I'm choosing something else right now. I'm choosing not to engage in this unwholesomeness. And sometimes we can just tell them, like, you're welcome here, and I'm not paying attention to you. You can continue with these two methods as feels appropriate for the rest of the meditation. And so examining the danger in the thoughts by reflecting on the unwholesomeness, the misguidedness, and the dukkha. Or trying to forget them, not give attention to them. Using this simile of shutting our eyes, looking away, so to speak. So there's another period now for break / movement, walking. Perhaps this time you're not in so much need for the bathroom. Perhaps there you can do some actual walking or other movements. Perhaps not everyone has the ability to walk, and you can also do some other movements if you'd like. And really also in movement, even if you're going to the bathroom or get some tea or whatnot, see if you can notice thoughts or mind states arise that are not less wholesome, and if you can apply any of the methods that we've talked about so far, one that resonates for you, or that you feel that could be helpful or supportive for you. And we'll come back in 15 minutes at 35 after the hour. So see you then.
Okay, welcome back. We'll plunge on ahead, and I see several of you here. But if you're available to turn on the camera, that's always nice. So I want to speak now about these fourth and fifth methods. We're getting toward a complete set at this point, and also a little bit about using the methods in a skillful way once you've got these 5 things in your toolbox. And we're going to have a chance for a couple more Q&A periods, by the way. I know we just did a sit and didn't give you a chance to ask yet, but we want to give a few more teachings, and there will be other opportunities for questions and discussion. So the methods that Kirsten and Marjolein have talked about so far are very thorough and helpful. And you may find that they're valuable for quite a few circumstances that you have of distracting thoughts or unwholesome thoughts coming in, either during your meditation or even in daily life, as we've been pointing to. They certainly address these thoughts from several different angles, and they may be sufficient in many cases. You may notice that most of them, so we've discussed so far, are about non-engagement. And that's the broad method. Is our issue with these thoughts is that we find them juicy and we grab onto them and we either proliferate them, enjoying them, or we fight against them in some way. And there's some engagement going on there. And so the first strategies help to remove energy in various ways from that engagement that we are doing with them habitually. You might get the sense from this, I hope not, but I've heard this from students, so I'll name it, is that this is kind of about positive thinking. It's like you see something that you don't want and you just say, oh, that's not so nice. Let's just do something nice instead. And you could engage with that subtle underlying attitude, but you'll find over time it's not very satisfying. This practice, as you know, overall is about seeing things clearly and getting an understanding and a way of managing our mind. So all of that is an introduction to say that this fourth method starts pointing toward a way when we could skillfully engage a little bit with these distracting thoughts. If we've tried the other methods first and it's not really working to not engage at all, we may need to turn and look a little bit more carefully at what's going on there. After all, the instruction for dukkha, for unwholesomeness in our practice, is that it should be understood. And so this fourth method is named for cases that are what the Buddha calls tangles in the mind. The mind is really entangled around something. Often there are several different strands to a repetitive thought pattern that keeps coming, it keeps coming. And it's just sticky, and we're not able to really turn away and keep our mind in a good direction. So in that case, The way it's stated in the sutta, the phrase for it is stilling the thought formation of those thoughts, which is vitaka, sankhara, santana. So you may recognize the word. Sorry, there's a little bit of sound outside. I hope you're not hearing it too much. Great. So vitaka is thought, and sankhara, are these mental formations that you may have heard about in other teachings that the Buddha gives. So we want to find some way to understand how those thoughts are being formed in the mind, and then still that, kind of remove the fuel from them. Why are these so entangling? What is going on there? We have to be able to see that in order to know how to remove what's conditioning those thoughts, essentially. So this would be for thoughts that are sort of coming back and back over an extended time period. And this is usually understood, even though it has this phrase, stilling the thought formations, which sounds a little technical. It's really understood as understanding and investigating the conditions that are supporting those thoughts. So we have to be very clear in saying that this is not a long investigation into the past. How did I start to have these thoughts in the first place? That's a little bit more kind of like a psychotherapeutic or psychoanalytic approach. And that's not what's being pointed to here. We're not actually so concerned exactly with engaging the content of the thoughts per se. It's more like the structure of those thoughts that are here and kind of what is fueling them. Often what's fueling them is some kind of view or some kind of assumption or idea that we haven't seen. And it's going on in the background, and it's continually creating these particular thoughts. And so we want to look a little bit more carefully. Let's look underneath. Where's the factory producing all of these thoughts? Often it's emotional, or it could be a view of some kind. So what we're doing is we're looking in the present moment. What are the conditions that are supporting these thoughts, rather than tracing them far back into the past? So an example of where this method can be particularly useful would be cases where we are often getting stuck because we're bringing in a habit somehow from our daily life into meditation. This is often the case where we need to do this deeper investigation. So just, for example, many people get frustrated trying to settle their mind into concentration. It just won't do it. They know that they want to get tranquil and calm, and they're trying to stay on the breath, do some samadhi practice, and it's just not happening. And so then there's this frustration. I can't get this to happen. And so, right there, we have a thought, and we could, keep turning back to the breath. We could, when these thoughts come in about, I can't do this, it's not working, we can say, oh, this is not helpful. I'm going to set these aside. I'm not going to pay any attention. I'm going to go back to the breath. But after a while, if this is a recurring pattern, you might start to wonder, well, maybe these thoughts are coming because I have an underlying attitude that I should be able to just get my mind into concentration. It's about how hard I apply myself to the breath. And if I were to just try a little harder, stick with it a little more, have a little more determination, then I could do it. And we don't see that we've brought in an idea. Maybe we're a project manager at work and we've got our spreadsheet and we're ticking through, the milestone markers week by week, and we've got to drive this person to do this and this person to do that in order that the whole thing can unfold. And suddenly we're doing that with our mind in meditation. Just so you know, this is not the way to get into concentration. It doesn't actually work. So, which we discover, but so it might be that without realizing it, we've brought in some way of doing our meditation or way of approaching this situation that is leading us into continually having distractions and then getting frustrated, and the whole process is not working. And if we were to look more carefully, we would just see, oh, it's because I believe this is a project that I'm supposed to drive through to the first jhana, and that's the goal. And so that can be a useful investigation to see. And we suddenly see, oh, that's the person that's driving this. Maybe I should relax that. Maybe that's not a helpful thought formation to be putting in place. There are other habits we bring in from other places, like competitiveness, for example. So then that can fuel a lot of comparing thoughts. So competitiveness going on there. Self-doubt can be an underlying view or emotional attitude that we hadn't seen, fueling a lot of thoughts. Wanting to show off to the teacher about how great my meditation is. So I'm gonna sit in a way that I think is gonna be pleasing, so I can have a good report at my next interview. Things like that. As an example, from my practice, I was told near the beginning of my practice, I like breath meditation, so I was learning different kinds of breath meditation, and I was told that counting the breaths can be a way to stay with the breaths, and it can. That's an effective technique, especially for calming a mind that's kind of busy. As we give the thinking mind something skillful to do, we give it a thought of 1, 2, 3. It's better than the other thoughts we might be having. But I found that I was continually kind of falling off of the counting or getting dull through counting. And I didn't understand exactly why it wasn't working. And then finally I just turned and I said, well, what is going on with this functioning of this method? And I found that for me, I would get caught up in the words. Words are concepts. And so it was very easy for me to start just focusing on 1, 2, 3 as kind of a moving word mantra kind of object. And I no longer had the breath anymore. So I had brought in kind of a habit of getting drawn into words as concepts and forgetting that they were meant to be a support in practice. So that's a little bit more subtle, right? I had to look underneath at what my view, the way I was applying this particular technique was not working. And so actually it was easy to drift off then because I was getting drawn into a concept. So that's something I didn't have to go back and think about, well, why is that? Is it because I have a mathematical background and I'm fascinated by numbers, so I think they're interesting? That doesn't matter. It was just that was the habit of my mind when I engaged with the counting numbers. So I don't actually do that method anymore. It doesn't really work for me. So the image of this method is to go into more and more subtle postures. So the Buddha says that maybe a person is walking fast and then they ask themselves, why am I walking fast? Why don't I walk more slowly? And then they're walking slowly and they say, well, why am I walking? Why don't I sit? They sit, stand, and then they sit and then they lie down. They keep going to these more subtle postures. This is the way we keep seeing kind of layers of what is fueling our distraction in the moment, not by worrying about why and the story and ourself and all that, but just like what are the conditions in this moment that are supporting it, and can we get more and more quiet, allow the mind to stop doing each of those things. We'll find that our self is often entangled in this, either at the gross level or at one of the more subtle levels. We've got a self in mind. Either it's literally about me, or more subtly, it's about looking good or feeling good or bolstering some idea of how things should be done. When we start to see the self that's there, if that can be let go, that's often quite effective. So slowly we are untangling the tangle, and not by creating a new story about it, that doesn't help, not by doing a complex analysis, but just by relaxing each layer. Kirsten at the very beginning pointed to ease being a marker of how we can decide if something's wholesome, unwholesome, if we've been able to go to this more refined replacement. Again, when we're seeing these layers, we look more and more refined, more and more easeful as it goes down. Okay, so that might be something to try, again, on these entrenched patterns. And then there is a fifth method, This one has very stark language, which is that if those thoughts really won't stop, we are to beat down, constrain, and crush mind with mind. Whoa, okay. So a lot of people are kind of shocked by this. It's kind of a last resort. The simile is of a strong man. I guess I'll update it here. So just as a strong man might seize a weaker man by the head or shoulders and beat him down, constrain him, and crush him, so too we should stop our thoughts. Okay, so this is obviously not the first resort. But also, it has this violent image, and a lot of people, of course, don't like to. They say, "Oh, that's terrible," and I don't want to be like a mean guy. But the strong guy is not supposed to be like mean and aggressive. It's supposed to represent the strength of our resolve to be wholesome, the strength of our resolve to keep our mind in a place that's valuable, that's useful, that's onward leading, that's not leading to dukkha. This is how much we care about not allowing dukkha into the mind. So I've actually heard one teacher phrase this as, "You are not getting one more minute of my life." Can you imagine saying that to a pattern? That starts to sound a little more skillful. You don't say that first, but kind of the emergency brake after a while. Like you might only need to use this method. One teacher said like once a decade. So I don't know if that's literal, but don't get too excited about bringing this one in. But if our intention is clear that this is coming not from aversion but from wisdom, then this is a fine method to use. It shows the strength of our resolve to keep the mind in a good place. I've gotten so excited talking about these, I'm going a little over, but I want to say now how to use these methods together as a set. So we've assembled kind of this toolbox of different things we can try, which is great in and of itself. But how do we apply them skillfully as a set? This could be like the whole rest of your life practice. So it's hardly possible to easily describe it. As I said in the guided meditation earlier, it's kind of an art form. But I can say what the recommendation from the Buddha is, which is that, first of all, there's kind of an assessment. Is this thought wholesome or unwholesome? And is it a major distraction or not? If it's not a major distraction, even if it's unwholesome, just go back to the breath. That's one way of using method number one. But if it's distracting, then we can try to counterbalance it. Generally, we would use these methods in order. So first thing, try to counteract it with something that is a wholesome counterpart of the unwholesome. We directly act against that tendency to go to the unwholesome, replacing aversion with metta, for example, or somebody asked earlier about anxiety. Metta is a great one for that too. So, and then go down through them. But in a given sit, don't just flip through all five. You don't want to just like say, well, I guess replacing didn't work because it came back 10 seconds later. So I'm going to go on to the next one. Stick with one for a while and see how it goes. And it's probably not until we've done many sits that we know which ones are the ones that we would actually need to really investigate carefully, like the fourth method. We would have these other ones that we do first. But over time, we'll see the ones that are the real tangles that we might need to look at a little more carefully. And if we take this on over a long time, of really learning to work with our mind, we actually start to become very skilled at what's called the management of the mind. We're not in 100% control, but we can, we learn to move and shift and change and respond to the mind in a skillful way. And this is all part of the art of practice. It's part of wisdom and it's part of compassion, keeping the mind, dealing with the mind in a skillful, helpful way. So lots to think about and practice with. Think about in a skillful way, of course. We have some time for Q&A, which is going to be led by Kirsten, but you could ask any of us if you want.
That's right. Yeah, thank you, Kim. So I'll just facilitate the Q&A, but please feel free to direct questions to each of us or we'll hand them off to each other. Jess.
Hi, this has been such a great session. Thank you for hosting. Um, I'm wondering, so often really unwholesome thoughts are intertwined with strong negative emotions. And I'm wondering, and they can kind of get convoluted, what's a thought and what's an emotion. So often when I experience strong emotions during practice, I'll go towards a rain practice. I'm wondering how much we can apply these tools to emotions. And if so, is it the same? Is it different? Should we even be thinking about kind of differentiating between the two?
Oh, such a good question. And definitely. So, I mean, one really skillful question to ask when there's a lot of repetitive thought is to drop into the body and sense, is there an emotion fueling that repetition? Oh, you just disappeared from my screen.
I think it's I put my hand down. There you go.
Oh, thanks. Okay, there you are. It's nice to actually talk to you. Um, And the RAIN practice is actually, in some ways, very applicable to this fourth method that Kim just brought in. There's an investigation there that's happening. For those who are not familiar with it, you're recognizing what's happening, you're accepting what's happening is the A, you're investigating it, and then you're not identifying with it. So there's that depersonalization that happens. But certainly this relationship between emotion and thought is something that we can apply that same curiosity to, and to recognize when one is fueling the other is very much part of this practice. And then to determine wholesome, unwholesome, apply these methods, not apply these methods, how do we sit with that and work with that? um there was quite a bit of nuance in that question too. I hope I didn't miss anything. Does that feel satisfying?
I think so. I think the only piece maybe that would be helpful if you could also touch on is just how important is it to differentiate between the two? And I guess part of, the later parts where we're trying to forget the emotion or the thought and push it away. I wonder, is that applicable to the emotions as well, or is there some kind of danger in that?
So differentiating between thought and emotion as facets of our experience is something that we develop that dexterity with. And again, they do feed on one another. I would say that the way that I tend to kind of categorize emotion is that there's a very palpable felt sense of it in my body. Um, and the the you said something about pushing away. Um, Maybe you could sort of describe that fifth technique as a bit of a push away, but there's also we're actively identifying it. So, there's an identification, and then there's a care for ourselves and care for the wholesome state of our mind, a protectiveness of the wholesome state of our mind. So I just wanted to be a little bit like precise maybe about that language, that we're not feeding more aversion into the situation. Um, I might, just because I've also been speaking quite a bit, and I can sense that I'm not quite satisfying your question
No,
about
this is
the
very
difference
helpful.
between emotion and thought. If Marjolein or Kim might want to share some wisdom here, I'd love to hear.
So much.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I'll add a little bit, which is that there isn't actually a strong differentiation in Buddhism between thought and emotion. They're said to come from the same place, really. And as Kirsten pointed out, they do fuel each other. So I don't think we need to worry so much about whether it's a thought or whether it's an emotion. Some people, it's just a difference in how people experience them. I don't know that we necessarily push them away. There can be maybe I'll see if there's a slight unseen dualistic thinking coming in, which is that sometimes there's an idea that either we're going to express or maybe not literally express, but kind of affirm or go with an emotion because, you know, it's there, it's real, it's me, it's my experience. Or if we're not, then we're going to repress it and deny it. And I would say practice actually doesn't do either of those things. It goes right down the middle. What's the alternative to either expressing, approving, affirming, or repressing, denying, etc.? Being aware, holding space for, without allowing it to have its agenda in a sense. And if it's an unwholesome emotion coming from one of these three unskillful roots, that's the best approach for allowing it to have its life and fade away. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you both.
Yeah, we have an emotion affirming a society that says if we feel it, it's real and true and myself and must be taken seriously. That's not always true.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Laurette, I believe that you are next.
Thank you. I love that previous question. Thank you very much for that. I was just wondering what the simile is for the fourth one.
Kim, would you like to?
The simile for the fourth one is a person going to more and more subtle postures. So they're walking quickly.
I didn't get
so now
that.
you remember me saying it. So it's walking quickly, walking slowly. Eventually they end up lying down in the most easeful posture. So this is about withdrawing the source.
Got it. Thank you.
Kind of love that simile. Joni.
Thank you very much. Kim, when you were talking about that fourth method, you raised the question, why? Why am I walking fast? Perhaps when I could walk more slowly. If I go in that direction of asking why, I'm going to be starting to search for answers. And so I'd like to ask if why is part of the question, if there's another alternative, or if why can be replaced in a different way, or look at the walking fast in a different questioning kind of way through observation or something like that. And then my second question has to do with needing a little more clarification on number 3, because if I go to some sort of, say, I don't know if I'd call it avoidance, but walking away, like not paying attention to something, I'm not sure how to get to that because I'm going to drop right into why. So I hope those questions make sense.
Okay, I'll start out and then pass on to Marjolein. So I think you might have addressed your own question in saying, so the why, by the way, is just what I read in the translation of the sutta. I was reading from the text. So nice to include those actual words, but I don't think it's meant to be a literal, the why, the translation of the word why is something like for what reasons, right? For what reasons am I doing that? And none of the other explanation about this method does the Buddha say that we should have a list of 3 reasons at the end. This is why I'm walking fast, and therefore, it's a more softer than that. It's like, oh, I'm walking very quickly. Perhaps I could walk more slowly. Perhaps I could. The mind is really wrapped up in this. Maybe there's what's going on there. Something like that. And you had other words, observing, etc. So I think you answered your own question. No, you don't have to go with the why. Go with what works for your mind. Yeah.
And the second part of your question was around the method where you look away, and then you said you're also going to the why. Can you explain a little bit what you mean by you're going to the why if you look away?
Thank you. When I look away, I'm going to be puzzled at why I'm looking away, because that comes across to me as avoidance. And that would be, in a way, a defilement. So I'd like to ask the question relating to, if I look away, where do I look?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's not that we're looking away out of a defilement. So the looking away is not, in this case, based on a defilement. It's based on skillful means. So it's based on we recognize that whatever has arisen is unwholesome and not onward leading, and that it is the other methods so far haven't worked yet. So the best thing to do now is to turn our attention away from this unwholesomeness. We might have tried to replace it with something wholesome. We might have seen the danger in it. We might have, and it didn't work. And so now we're looking at like, oh, how can we just look away? Can we just not pay attention to it? And like you're making a good point that if you look away, like your attention is always going to be somewhere. So if you're looking away, then you can see if there's something else that is most obvious in that moment, or you can direct your attention to something neutral. So it doesn't have to be something wholesome like in the first method. It can be something neutral too. So just your feet on the ground, or just kind of the like a visual thing, like looking at the wall or looking out the window or something like that, and just fully putting your attention in on the visual field. Or it could be anything like that. It could be auditory, and so that's kind of that method. But like if it doesn't resonate with you, if it's not something that works for your mind, then you could just leave that as well. So you can just try and see.
Would you say to look away and go somewhere else? Something like that? Look away from the defilement, the
Yeah.
danger, the problem. Don't ask why, just look away.
Yes,
And
exactly.
find something else where to land. So like you say, look at your feet or watch your breath, like refocus on that.
Yes.
So do I understand that better now? Thank
Yeah.
you.
Great. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Jenny.
So I just want to name that we're past the time that we had reserved for questions, but it feels like a useful use of our time. Does that sound okay to you and Kim and Marjolein to take a few more? Okay. So so I'll keep going. Samantha?
Hi, thank you so much. This is a really helpful class. So I just found myself in the meditation kind of combining methods 2 and 3, and I just don't know if I'm doing too much storytelling. I kind of started envisioning the unwholesome thoughts as kind of dark temptresses who were kind of beckoning me to come down this path. And I was aware that the path they wanted me to come down as they were trying to tempt me, had these repercussions. And I was saying, no, thank you. I know where you're trying to take me. So that was kind of the number 2. And then I was combining number 3 was kind of saying, no, thank you. I'm not going to go there with you. And then I kind of almost combined it with number 1 saying, in fact, I'm going to turn and go down this path instead. I'm just not sure if that's just too much story making and I'm kind of getting involved more in thoughts.
Well, did it feel useful? Did it feel like it you actually developed a more wholesome state of mind and that there was more direct sense of clarity with what's happening now?
I did. I mean, kind of visualizing them, like I said, as kind of dark temptresses versus, I was doing this very basic light and dark thing, I think, or just, not to put colors into it, but, what's good and bad, wholesome and unwholesome. It did work for me.
I think that answers your question. I mean, it sounds like you were also very clear about which method was which, and to be able to say, 3 and then 2 and then 1. I mean, that's really great discernment, and the fact that it actually served the purpose is enough. If you do find that it starts to busy the mind, or you get lost in, the visualization of these beings tempting you away, then that would be a sign that, potentially it's getting a little bit um too distracting. Yeah, but thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, Sue.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I put my question kind of in the chat.
Oh.
But I'm also, I guess I'm just curious, are these methods really meant to be during sitting meditation or walking meditation, or is there an application? It feels like we've done both, a little bit of application in daily life, but mostly meditation practice. So I'm just wondering if they're meant to be for both, and or if they are, any suggestions about how to use them off the cushion, because that's been a struggle for me.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll say that absolutely they are useful off and on the cushion, and serve really well. And especially when we can really recognize the ways in which it gets the approaches do get more subtle. So like what Kim was describing in terms of the fourth method, we're really starting to get underneath, what is causing a particular habit of the mind. And these can be really strong in daily life. Like, um, you know, I I have there's a particular view of someone being a certain way, or of the world the world being a certain way, or I'm not doing it right, or the stories that we hear recurring over and over again. Shaila Catherine, a Dharma teacher, has a book that she's devoted to the sutta, and she has so many examples from her students who are applying these practices to their daily lives, that they're noticing a resistance to practicing yoga on a daily basis, for example, and using the method to see that, oh, there's this thought underneath that aversion that I'm identifying with, that I can't do this. Okay, so what happens when I apply a method? Replace that thought, or see the where that thought leads us. So there's ways that we can really just bring into the light in our daily practice. I don't know if Marjolein or Kim would like to add anything there. And the suit of that. Oh, so go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go.
Yeah, go
Please.
ahead.
No, I thought you were shaking your head, so I was going to ask Sue if that felt satisfying, but I'd love to hear what you were going to say.
Perhaps we can ask Sue first. This feel satisfying for you, Sue? Yes.
Yes and no. I guess I'm looking for more, I don't know, tips or tricks. And maybe what I'm answering my own question is, it's just more mindfulness to thought off the cushion.
Yeah, that's a beautiful answer. What were you going to share, Marjolein?
Yeah, I thought I'd go into more tips and tricks.
Great.
So, yeah, and I think that's a great answer that you're giving yourself. More mindfulness of thinking, more mindfulness of emotions, like we've been discussing before, that the emotions and the thoughts are so intertwined. And so and I think it's been named before, when there is some constriction happening, when there's not an ease in daily life, at that moment we can see, oh wait, there's probably something going on that we can pay attention to. And so then we can start to look inward, like what thoughts am I having? What thoughts are arising right now? What emotions and feelings? And sometimes, like when we're just starting out with practicing in daily life, we might actually need to stand or sit still for a moment to go inward. And once we get more and more practice, we can just do it on the go. And just whatever happens, even in a conversation with someone, or we can notice, oh wait, there's this, like as I was saying, like I'm in conversation with my partner and I feel this anger arising over something. I am already catching myself doing the arising of the anger, and then I can prevent more harm from being done by not acting on that anger. Or perhaps even like saying, oh, I need a little break now, or, just taking care of what is needed. And so, yeah, those are some ideas I have. And I think we could have a whole other half day on, on just daily life practice with this. But yeah, I hope this is a little helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please to that half day on that.
I think I'm just going to take one more, just to keep us on time. So, Aditi, did you?
Yep. So my question was like, I noticed in my last retreat, like when there is a life event, it seems like, sometimes mindfulness is a little slow to catch up, like, it's not right there. Then the mind seems to be processing the life event and bringing out stuff about the past event. And in that case, like, I haven't tried these 5 per se, but I mean, I try all the tricks that I know. Then the only way to, like what Kim, like you mentioned that phrase that it has a life of its own and it passes away. So I noticed, like, in the past retreat, like the first 3 days, I had lots of thoughts about my recent trip back home. And by the 4th day, they were like all gone. So it felt like, like, is there anything I can do in my next retreat when there's like a big life event, or I have to lose like 4 days of the retreat to life, which is like not processed so far, That's just my question, yeah.
So the question is, just to make sure I'm clear, that you're recognizing that on retreat, the mind will sort of keep generating story until it sort of eventually kind of gets more tranquil, and you're wondering how to speed up that process.
Exactly.
Yeah. Don't we all want to speed up that process? I mean, I think it really speaks to, Kim pointed out in the practice, it's like we have a certain amount of agency, but we don't have 100%. We do the best that we can and bring our mindfulness back to investigate or be conscious of what's happening. And that's something that develops over time. Someone actually put something in the chat around, these practices best learned with formal practice, that there's something here, like, yes, we practice it, and it's really helpful to practice it on the cushion because there's less distraction. And then as we get skilled, we can start to apply it more in daily life and see it more clearly. But I mean, you're speaking about a retreat progression that's quite natural, that the mind just naturally starts to settle more and become more tranquil given more practice. If Marjolein or Kim want to interject or share a different perspective, I'd love to hear it. Okay, well, I'm going to hand it over to Kim, and I'll let you decide how you want to close the day, since we've done a little bit of changing around.
That's
Thank
okay.
you.
This has been great.
Yeah.
I am so inspired and delighted by all of the questions that came up. And I think that we will leave a little bit of space for kind of final thoughts at the end to make sure that everyone feels like it's complete. So I did see your hand there, Christoph. If you could just hang on for a moment, we may either answer your question or get a chance for you to ask it later. So I think I'd just like to offer us a kind of a step back and assessing all the territory that we've covered today, in a sense. So I'm hitting the main points. And the first is that, we do have this mindfulness practice where the first instruction that we always get is just be with your experience. Whatever's happening, you just notice it. And, it's really important to be able to just be present and not judge and not change anything, not fix anything, etc. And that's a great instruction. In fact, that's the way that we'll eventually be able to be with things as they are, which is when we do that completely, there's no suffering. But along the way, we have to work with a mind that the parts of the mind are not that interested in being in the present moment and have other agendas. They're coming from places in us that are not well integrated, not yet very free. And so there is a place in our practice for having taking action. In fact, this is a very common question that people have. Many times in practice, they'll raise their hand and say, how do I know when to just be with something and when do I get to do something about it? Because the teacher keeps saying, just be with your experience, just go with the breath. So here we've given a little more nuance. We've given quite a bit of information around that general question that people have. So there's the assessment. Is this wholesome or unwholesome? First of all, that is a fundamental skill on the path. That's the basis of wisdom, is to know what's wholesome and what's unwholesome. Don't worry if what you see is unwholesome. Don't get caught right there and say, oh my gosh, it shouldn't be there. It's terrible. I'm terrible. Instead, here we have 5 things in our toolbox that we can do to help the mind stay on track, help the mind be more often in a wholesome state. So we don't need to believe the unwholesome state or identify with it or get upset about it. We could just go back to a wholesome state, right? So there's the breath, or there's the present moment, or whatever we're doing, whatever activity we're doing, just go back to that. Or we could deliberately choose something that counteracts the kind of unwholesome thought we were having. That helps to slowly undermine our interest in that root, undermine the power of that unwholesome root, whether it's the spectrum around greed and desire, the spectrum around aversion and hatred, the spectrum around delusion and ignorance. So we can choose to do something else with the mind that's more skillful. That may not always work. So there's also a way that we can bring in our cognitive mind, our more directed understanding, instead of just, turning away immediately just because we can see, oh, that's not helpful. We might need to remind ourselves more clearly, hey, this is really not helpful. This, and I know why it isn't helpful. It's because it's, harmful in the moment. It leads to dukkha. It's not worthy. It's blameworthy. It's probably going to lead to bad results. So we can actually bring in some reflection, and that adds a little strength to it, and that might work pretty well. Then there are times where you just say, all right, I'm just not going to go with this. This engaging with the thought, even to that degree, is fueling it subtly in some way. Like the way, there are certain times when something's pestering you and it's better just to kind of not go with it. And so then there's this third method of removing our attention, essentially just looking away, softening the mind. I find in meditation sometimes I can do that. When the mind is quiet enough, there's even a case where I can see a thought starting to build, like a bubble starting to rise to the surface. I'm just like, I don't even need to know what that was going to be. And goes away. As my teacher says, oh no, what if that was the great American novel coming into my mind? What if that was the solution to world peace and I didn't pay attention to it? But, based on the track record of the number of thoughts I've had in my life, probably it wasn't going to be that. So, you don't have to go with it. You don't even have to pay attention to every thought. And then as we get skilled working with our mind in these ways, which is a lot of what we do, there are times in specific cases where we would actually engage and try to understand the tangle, understand the dukkha in some way. I want to put in a warning on this one because we have such an overly psychologized culture that people want to investigate first. They always want to do the later methods first, 4 and 5. They're not meant to be used very often necessarily. So it's like, oh, I have a thought. why do I have that? Where did I get that pattern? What happened with my fourth grade teacher several decades ago that probably put this in place? I'm joking a little bit, but the investigation can be useful, can be fruitful. It's also, just so you know, it's endless, actually. To investigate and investigate and investigate, there's no end to that. What you want to do is investigate enough that you can quiet the thought, right? The vitaka sankhara, so that it doesn't need to keep arising. But there's really endless trails to the mind. So it's good to know that, maybe. And then finally, if it's really, really being harmful, we can say, no, you're not getting one more minute of my life right now. And that one we use with extreme care. So I hope this gives a sense that we have a toolbox, we have some order that we would want to use them in. So the basic instruction that you keep getting about just stay with the present moment, just be mindful, is still completely valid. And these 5 are ways, like additional kind of tools we would have to work a little bit more nuanced way with the mind. And I hope this isn't meant to be, it is meant to be empowering. I hope you feel somewhat empowered, that you might maybe enjoy the process of being with the mind all day. Don't feel victimized too much. And maybe in the end, the last method number 6, humor. Just, laugh at this silly mind. It's trying so hard, but often it's not quite on it, right? So don't worry too much about the craziness of the mind, and just enjoy that you have a practice. We're back to gratitude, which Kirsten starts every day with. Thank goodness we have a path. We have a practice. And I love that you all came to engage with it today. So now we have maybe 2 or 3 minutes just in case there's anything still hanging, and then Marjolein will close us out. Christoph, do you still have your question? I'll give you the first chance.
Yeah, thank you. I was just trying to double check, right? Based on how I understood number 3, it's almost like a timeout or a parking lot for something that is overwhelming. Or am I going down the wrong path there?
Do you want to respond to that, Marjolein? Or I would say that's the main use of it. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's the main use of it, and that's one of the ways we can use that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily have to be only with overwhelming emotions or feelings or thoughts. It can also be with just kind of general unwholesome or unhelpful thoughts or emotions.
Mm-hmm.
That you can just say stop or not now or something like that.
Yeah. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Anything else that would help folks feel complete, or anything left hanging at this point? I know not everything has been solved, but that's the nature of practice. Okay, great. Well, enjoy your practice, and Marjolein.
Yeah, I want to end with sharing the merit today. And so maybe you're not familiar with that practice. Merit is, you can also see that as goodness. And when we practice together, when we come together as a sangha, then goodness is generated, merit is generated. And it is independent of what actually happens in our practice or how this session has been for you. Just pure our intention to be here and to practice and to be together and to listen to the Dharma is generating this goodness, is generating this wholesomeness. And so this wholesomeness, this goodness can be shared with all beings everywhere. And we can do that through a little practice. And it's good to know that when we share this goodness, we don't lose it. So what actually happens is that it multiplies. And so it's just, I always compare it to an idea. If you share an idea with someone, you're not losing the idea, you're sharing it, and it's multiplied in that way. And so when we share the merit, we often put our hands together. So if you wish, you can. It's not obligatory, of course. And so may the goodness that has arisen from being together, practicing together, listening to the Dharma, may this goodness, this merit, may it be of benefit to all beings everywhere. May it contribute to their well-being and their freedom, just like it contributes to our well-being and freedom. And so to close us off, maybe we can all unmute and say goodbye and then have this chaotic
Thank you.
chaotic ending here. Thank you,
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Wow,
Thank you.
everybody.